Snow came to the eyrie like sifted sugar, light as breath and just as cold, and Sansa watched it drift in through the high-slit windows to melt on her palm. Below her the world fell away, a white gulf stitched with ridgelines. The mountain's ribs laid bare under winter's hand. Wind harped through galleries and rope bridges, and the winter sky pressed close as the inside of a shell. The eyrie made quiet from the noise of the world. It made her think of the godswood at Winterfell, the hush of snow and the way sound carried. Her brother's laughter, the groan of branches under ice, her mother's voice calm and stern. Memory hurt like a bruise. She let the flake vanish on her skin and did not look down. Behind her, the door's hinges whispered. "You were born for high places," Peter said. His voice was soft in the stone, velvet laid over iron. He stopped near enough that the cold of him met the cold of the air. "You stand here and the mountains bow." Sansa did not turn. The last time she had looked into his wolfish smile, she had watched her aunt fall, watched the sky open where the floor should have been. She had learned then that silence was armor, and a face could be a mask. She had polished both until they shone. "The mountains do not bow," she said. "They only wait." "Waiting is its own form of reverence," Peter murmured. He came to the window and stood with his hands folded, the knuckles pale and precise. Snow dusted the shoulders of his dark cloak. "I have news." He always did. She had learned that his news arrived sorted into drawers inside his mind, each labeled with the name of a man or woman, a house or trade, a fear or hunger. He would open one, let her see a corner of a letter and not the rest, close it, open another. He fed her truths in the measure that suited him, salted with lies. Today she thought he was looser with his store. Today he wanted something. "The Lords Declarant are in the valley," he said, casual. "Our bronze yone has gathered them at the gates." Sansa's palm curled around the stone sill where the snow had melted. Bronze yone Royce, Anya Waynwood with her hawk's eyes, Horton Redfort, Simon Templeton, Gilwood Hunter, Benedar Belmore. Names like stones, and each could break teeth. Below them, the gates of the moon crouched in gray, three-sided and thick-walled, winter's dwelling for the nobility when the eyrie was too bitter for flesh. They would be warmed down there at their hearths with wine and roasted venison, and in their warmth they would sharpen words like knives and point them up at the Vale's eyrie with its cold blue falcon banners. They would say, "Littlefinger killed Lisa Arryn." They would say, "He has deceived us, he is a hedgelord dressed in velvet." They would say, "A bastard girl sits at his side." "What do you mean to do?" Sansa asked. "What we planned," Peter said, which meant what he had planned, and she had learned to dress in her own colors, so the cloth would look as if she had woven it. "We will invite them up as far as their nerves can carry them, we will flatter them, we will lace their suspicions with sweeter suspicion, and we will send them away with the conviction that we are their best refuge from the danger they imagine." He smiled with half his mouth. "And we shall give them something true amid the false to feed on." He had taught her that men believed they were too clever to be fooled by lies, and so the truth made the bait. Sansa looked at the white rising up around the eyrie and thought of another truth. Bronze outlasted velvet in hard winters, and the Vale had old roots. She touched the raven feather brooch at her throat. "We will need Miranda," she said. "Her father knows every ledger in the gates. Little clever Elaine." He liked to use the false name like a leash. Late summer, he had wrapped the name around her while snow still clung to the high passes. Elaine Stone, his natural daughter. "I've already sent for her," he said, and in that moment she saw the drawer he had opened for Miranda Royce, saw that her friend's laugh and bright eyes were not items he counted among coin and ships. Not yet. Peter had warmth, but he stored it grudgingly and spent it only when it would yield heat enough to sell. Sansa let herself smile with her mouth and not her eyes. "We'll need more than ledgers." "Of course," he said. "We have a singer, we have a boy lord, and we have you." Elaine, he meant, the bastard of a petty lord from the Fingers, dear to the sickly boy who could be coaxed to drink his syrups, to speak a pretty word where a steel one would have broken. But Sansa had bled for the name he would not say to her, and in private she wore it beneath her skin like a blade. Sansa Stark had learned that softness did not mean surrender. It meant sheathed steel, slow to show, quick to cut. She had been a song, she had become a listener. She had been a pawn, she had become a piece that knew how to move. She turned then and watched Peter watch her. His eyes were a gray she could not rely on. "Send the birds," she said. "Let the Lord's declarant climb. I'll see to the boy." Robin Aaron slept as he always slept, restless and thin. A sparrow's bones in a boy's skin and a falcon on his breast stitched in blue thread. Miranda Royce sat on the foot of the bed with a deck of carved ivory hounds and stags and owls, and stacked them into pale towers while the boy muttered in his dreams and reached for softness that always seemed to flee his fingers. "You're late," Miranda said without looking up. "Coleman dosed him when the bells chimed noon. He'll wake sulky. I would, if someone poured milk of poppy into my mouth while I was listing my grievances." "What grievances?" Sansa smoothed the boy's hair, and he sank toward the touch as plants bent toward sun. For all his fretfulness, he had a talent for trusting, and it made Sansa fiercely cautious for him. "We heard a new singer last night. He promised to write a lay about Robin's hawking." Miranda snorted. "The boy has never killed a bird in his life. He shrieks if a feather sticks to his glove. That will make it all the more heroic." Miranda set a rook on the top of the delicate tower and watched it sway, her mouth pursed. "Peter wants you in the solar." Bronze Yohn Royce arrived at the gates at dawn. Anya Waynwood by midday. "Peter would like us to be delightful." "Yes," Sansa said. "He would." Miranda looked up at her then, and the mischief in her eyes stirred with something heavier. "Do you ever want to let the mask fall, Elaine?" Sansa smoothed the boy's hair again. "Masks keep our faces warm in winter. And what when summer comes back? Then we choose a different mask." "Honest creature," Miranda teased, but softly. "Come, let us be delightful. If Peter expects sweetmeats, we'll give him sugared nettles." The solar felt warmer than elsewhere, as if Peter had coaxed the sun to sit in the window to gild his cheekbones. The place had the smell of leather and wax and old quills. He had already spread the tools of his charm. A plate of crystallized plums, a map of the Vale heavy with small bronze weights, 3 letters sealed with 3 different hands that the eyes fell to as if drawn by a thread. He had placed seats as carefully as men set rooks and knights, the chairs not so near that they implied intimacy, not so far that they signaled disdain. He had arranged a table with a little bowl of hot wine spiced with clove and star anise, not for drinking but for the perfume of it, because lords raised in old stone remembered hearth smoke and thought of their grandmothers when their mouths filled with spice. "You make it seem effortless," Miranda said as she shouldered the door with her hip and carried in a tray. "If ever I wed again, you shall dress the room." "If ever I wed again," Peter answered, "I shall dress the world." They were all 3 smiling when the first of the Lord's declarant stepped through the door. Yohn Royce wore his reputation the way he wore his bronze. Battered and serviceable, plain to look at, stubborn to crack. Age had set its stamp at the corners of his eyes, but he was as tall as rumor and his gaze would have pinned most men to walls. He took the room in with one sweep, and Sansa saw the tally of it cross his face. The warm bowl, the map, the arranged chairs. Miranda bobbed a curtsy to him too shallow to be insult, and Sansa's became a deeper one in which modesty laced itself with grace. Royce's gaze passed over her, slowed, returned. He had a granddaughter not much younger than she. Men looked at her with such eyes and saw softness. Sometimes they were right. Sansa tucked her hands into her sleeves and only raised them when she offered him a sweet. "My lord," she said softly, lowering her lashes. "The climb was long." "I've made worse," he answered. His voice had gravel in it. "Elaine Stone, is it?" "It is. Peter's girl." "I am my own," Sansa said pleasantly, and lifted the plate a fraction of an inch nearer his hand, so he had to take it or dismiss her tidily as if she were a maid. He took one of the plums, bit into it, made no expression at all. His mouth, she saw, was a mouth that saved smiles until there was something to smile at. The others came one by one. Lady Waynwood with a fur over her shoulders that had its own reputation. Templeton with his neat hands and his cautious loyalty. Horton Redfort, clean-shaven and cool-eyed. Benedar Belmore with the look of a man who had decided which way he would fall before anyone asked him to. They were the Vale's spine. They might bend, but they would expect to be asked. Peter did not ask. He invited them to sit and spoke of roads and taxes and brigands in the high road, of steel that could be found for a price and grain that could be had cheaper from Gulltown if one knew whom to offend and how to mend offense afterward. He told them useful truths, and when their interest warmed, he fed them a name and then took it away. Harry is due at Iron Oaks next fortnight, he said, and watched Waynwood's face as if it were a hearth in its first catching. A fine boy. The Vale, I think, will be strong when it rests on his shoulders. The Vale rests on an Aaron's shoulders, Lady Anya said crisply. Of course, Peter said with an apologetic spread of his hands. I meant no disrespect to Lord Robert's person. Person and title are not easily severed, Yohn Royce remarked. He took another sugared plum and did not look at Sansa when he did it, which is how she knew he was looking. And yet, Peter said, winter severs many things from summer's understanding. They fenced in this manner until the wine cooled and the air warmed with their breath. Words were blades here. The Lord's declarant wanted blood. Peter gave them meat as a man would to hounds that he meant to keep keen but not ravening. Sansa watched him and thought of the drawer where he kept Yohn Royce's name. She wanted to open it and see what Peter had placed there, what she could add. It was not fencing and sweetmeats that decided it. It was Robin Arryn, who came into the solar, pale as a candle, his hair untidy, his eyes huge. Coleman trailed at his heels like guilt, hands out to catch, too late. I dreamed of the sky, Robin announced, solemn and wobbly, and I was not afraid. Sansa went to him at once and took his icy hands. My lord, she said, as if she had only just that moment remembered he was a lord. We have guests. Robin blinked at the lords and gathered his dignity. Lords, he said, and bobbed a bow that threatened to overbalance him. Sansa clasped his arm with her steadying fingers. Welcome to my... He began, and Sansa squeezed, and he corrected in a breathless rush. To our hall. Your late lady mother would have kept you downstairs, my lord, Anya Waynwood said, not without warmth. This perch is too high for a boy. I am not a boy, Robin said, offended. I am Lord of the Eyrie. Our lord, Peter mended gently, and our charge. Robin's mouth set. Elaine says I would do well to see more of the gates this winter, he said. Sansa felt Peter's glance skitter over her like a knife that decided not to cut. I would like to sit in my father's hall. It is my right. In the small silence, Sansa heard the wind. It sounded like a long breath drawn and held. Anya Waynwood's brows winged together and then rose. Yohn Royce's gaze shifted from boy to girl and back to the man whose hall it was not. Templeton smoothed his beard. Redfort looked at the map. Belmore's lips moved like a man counting. Let us go down to the gates, Peter said after that pause had ripened into something that could be plucked. Lightly, as if the boy had asked to see a falconer's muse. Let us make a winter court there, where the cold will not chew our toes off at night. Lord Robert will hold audience, and the lords of the Vale can bring their complaints to him, and we shall mend what can be mended. He had meant to do this all along. The invitation had been drafted in his neat hand even before the first snow had stuck to the high road. But it mattered that the suggestion had been placed in the boy's mouth. It mattered that the boy had said the word right and not wrong. It mattered that Sansa's fingers had been the ones to tap their little language on his arm and bring him to the correct dignity he could inhabit without shaking. Sansa bent and kissed Robin's temple. His skin was cold as the window stone. Then it is decided, she said. We go to the gates. The descent took a day and half a night, and Sansa loved it in spite of her fear of heights because it felt like the world moving. The Eyrie was all bright austerity. The winding stony path between the 7 towers was the place where movement had meaning, where distances both shrank and expanded, where air shifted its teeth from one edge to another. Carved steps, rope bridges, the little sky cells huddled like barnacles to the rock. Frost burned the lungs and made the body sharp at its edges. Men spoke softly as if the air would resent the insult of loud voices. The lords' faces were turned downward and inward, concentrating on their feet, and so they did not see Sansa watching them. She gauged their balance by the way they took the turning at the second rope. She marked the men who refused the hands of the guides and the ones who grabbed too often. Miranda was nimble and cheerful and made jokes that traveled only as far as Sansa's ear. Peter climbed like a man who had counted the steps. Robin grew weary and white-lipped by the fourth tower, but he did not weep, and when they set him on a mule for the steep part, he pretended it was a griffin because he did not know what a mule should be to a lord. Gates of the moon opened to them with heat and tapestry and meat. The lower castle seemed loud after the mountain, loud with dogs and boys and guards and the clatter of pails and the slosh of beer. The great hall had banners and a hearth large as a house. Robin smiled at the sight of it as a boy does when they throw open a chest and inside is everything that boy has ever been promised will someday be his. Sansa felt something like hope and fear braided together tight. They made a court. Nestor Royce, keeper of the gates and cousin to Bronze Yohn, strode in with accounts and keys and a relief Sansa found almost indecently guileless. "My lady," he said to Sansa as if the title were hers with no need of trickery. She wondered what drawer his name lived in where Peter kept his thoughts, what fruit might be hidden there and when it would be ripe. She smiled to him and took the keys when he pressed them into her hands, heavy and useful. "The boy will sit," Peter announced, and Robin sat. The lords came before him one by one because they could hardly refuse when the boy shook so badly with the effort not to spill his cup that it made pity soft in their throats. Little matters first, Miranda had advised, and Peter had agreed as if the advice were his. A dispute over a pasture close to Wickenden. A complaint about a hearth tax in a village under Old Anchor's protection. A mill broken by flood. Robin listened. Sansa shaped his words in her soft voice. Peter made them law. They settled the small things quickly and cleanly because it made the lords think the big things could go the same way. They cannot, Sansa thought, but it was a lesson best learned after the coin had been counted out and handed across. At dinner after the third day, when their little court had the shape of a habit, Miranda slid into the seat at Sansa's side with cheeks pink from the cold. "Harry is hunting on Lady Waynwood's lands," she said. "He sends his respects to the Lord Protector's natural daughter." His messenger said the words not as a jest, which is a novelty. Sansa did not let her smile be too bright. "We will return his respects." "You will," Miranda said, "and he will tilt at you like every boy who ever wanted a pretty thing to be proud of." "It will be useful," Sansa said. Miranda's eyes danced. "You have grown sharp, Elaine. Winter does that." Miranda leaned, lowered her voice until only Sansa could hear. "I like your sharp. It has edges. You take care for Robin and you do not drool when Peter talks of admirable men. That is unusual in the Vale." "I drool when he speaks of admirable ledgers," Sansa said, and Miranda laughed so suddenly she choked on her wine. The men talked of Eric Hunter's quarrels with the Belmores. They argued about the road up to Hart's home and whether it needed more men this winter. They told stories of wolves in the high valleys. Peter listened and sifted all of it, his eyes measuring how each man held his knife and with what caution he salted his meat. He did not look at Sansa, and so she knew he counted her the way he counted the men. "Good. Count me. Measure me. Learn that I am not the coin you meant to spend when you spun me from the sack." She ate her fish and said small charming nothings to the man at her right and the woman at her left and showed the exact amount of interest in talk of hawking that Harry would expect and the exact amount of restraint in laughing at a jest about gulls that would mark her as not yet vulgar. Men told you what they were by the jokes they made. She collected them the way Peter collected sins. After supper, Peter asked her to walk with him, and she did because she always had. The corridor they took opened to a courtyard where the mountain's shadow had pooled like night ink. The stars were complicated and cold. Snow crunched underfoot. Somewhere a horse blew steam into its straw and stamped. Sansa tucked her hands in her sleeves again and let Peter do the talking. "Anya Waynwood was measuring you at table," he said. "She likes a girl with good posture. Make sure she sees you knit and hears you speak of the household accounts, and she will decide you are better than what she meant when she said natural." "I have no household to account for," Sansa said and watched her breath ghost. "You have this one," Peter said. "And soon enough you'll have one that rests on a falcon's wrist." "We have many lords who do not think we hold the bird properly," Sansa said. "We will teach them the grip. By flattery and sweetmeats," she said, mocking him a little. "And by fear," he said, not mocking at all. "Fear breaks men from their stubbornness faster than flattery. But it is a costly tool. And we are thrifty." He smiled at her and the smile reached his eyes. "We are." Many days passed in small matters, and Sansa learned what it was to rule a thing that did not yet know it was ruled. She liked the way order grew from her words like frost patterns from breath on glass. She liked the way Robin steadied when she touched him. Belmore complained about paying for more guards on a road he had no reason to use. Peter set them to arguing on purpose, because while they argued Sansa could ask the quiet questions of the men who were not making speeches. The sergeants, the captains, Nestor Royce with his kind face and his ledgers. In the end they rode out with 20 men and a woman with a scar across her lip who had killed 3 Moon brothers last winter and kept their beads. Miranda went with them because she was a Royce, and that is what Ronces did when there was iron to be set against teeth. Sansa stood on the steps beneath the banner and watched the riders diminish into the pale, and hoped they found the shepherd boy. They did not. What they found instead was a hut with its door torn off and a mother gone to her knees, keening into her hands. Sansa heard about it when Miranda came back with blood on her sleeve. "He was 12, Miranda said, and poured herself bread ale and drank it like a man who meant to drown something small. They had a woman with them, black hair with bones braided in. She smiled when she saw us and ran. She had a scar on her lip like mine. We collected 2 heads, but not hers." Sansa took a breath, another, and put her hand over Miranda's on the cup until the woman stilled. She asked Peter for the money to do it, and Peter made a precise, faintly pained face when she asked for so much and gave her it anyway. "You would be a fine Caestel. Lawn of my poorer holdings," he said, dry. "You have hands." "I also have a spine," she said, equally dry. He paused then and looked at her properly, as if he had discovered a new room in a house he owned. "Yes," he said, and took a sip of his wine. And for the first time in many days Sansa felt something like unease. There was admiration in his look, and admiration from Peter was a thing she had learned to handle with care. Admiration was the notch just before possession. You could be admired right up to the edge of a cliff. "We must speak of Harry," he said next, as if he had not just measured her height. "Lady Anya has consented to bring him to court for midwinter. I think we shall hold a feast." "Of course," Sansa said. "We shall serve him pride in a silver dish." "You will serve him a look that will make his heart hammer," Peter said, and smiled at his learning girl, and Sansa set her cup down before she shattered it. Winter came properly then. Snow fell not merely as dust but in great sheets that moved across the valley like marching armies, and the world redefined itself in white. The court went on at the gates because it had to. Lords came and went, trudging through the drifts with their cloaks white at the hem, their cheeks raw. The singer wrote a lay about Robin's hawking that made half the hall cry and the other half argue about what had really happened. And Sansa let him sing it twice because the sound made the boy lord sit straighter, and sitting straighter made him cough less, and coughing less made Coleman love them all. She tended to the small workings of a large house with a competence that surprised her until it did not. Stores of lamp oil, salting meat, mending boot soles. She liked tasks with edges, jobs that had ends. Between these and the court, she sat with Robin in the afternoons and told him stories of Winterfell so carefully that she could cut out the dangerous parts while keeping the heart. She told him about the sky velvet and the gray long days and the way snow could fill your ears and make drums from your own blood. She did not tell him about her father's dark head against the stone. She dreamt of Winterfell more often. In the dreams, it was always silent. In the dreams, she walked through rooms and her steps did not echo because everything was muffled with white, chambers and kitchens and galleries, all blank and remembering. She woke and told herself it was only the Vale's winter pressing its silence through her and not some omen or warning. She had little patience left for omens. On the day Harry arrived, the sky had turned the flat, ugly color snow can turn when it is about to fall again. Gulltown sent word of ships iced into their berths. The sisters sent saltness and a fish. A boy at the gate tried to climb the statue of a king gone to dust. Sansa stood at the top of the outside steps with Peter and Miranda and Jon Royce and Lady Anya Waynwood. She wore a plain gown of blue wool and a cloak trimmed in lamb, and a small chain with a little falcon on it that had belonged to some errand aunt in a drawer that Nestor had given her with the solemnity of a vow. She did not dress like a girl from a southern court. She dressed like a woman of the mountains. The wind hemmed her clothes toward her. When Harry rode in, he saw her first. She knew it by the way he drew his horse up, and then remembered himself and remembered Lady Waynwood and remembered he owed his courtesy somewhere else. She liked that he had to remember. It meant his mind had to work to do so. He was handsome in the way young men could be, with pride's light on him and a nose that would give him trouble in a few years when it realized how sharp it was. He had a squire at his side with a grin made mostly of foolishness. He came up the steps and bowed to Robin and to Lady Anya and to Jon Royce and then to Peter. He turned toward Sansa last, which was correct, and his eyes warmed, which was expected. She was 16 winters in her looks and wore the name of a natural daughter, and she knew exactly how pretty those things made her. She gave him a smile with edges and no warmth. "Lord Harding," she said. "Elaine," he said. Too familiar and thus exactly what Peter had predicted he would say. "They told me you were fair." They were unambitious in their adjectives. Miranda coughed into her glove. Lady Anya raised her eyebrows. Jon Royce's mouth twitched and then resumed being stone. Peter's eyes brightened with the pleasure of a plan going just so. "Words are cheap," Sansa said. "We prefer bread." "Bread," Harry repeated, wrong-footed. "Elaine oversees the kitchens as well as the court." Peter rescued him. "She is as serious about flour as a knight is about his horse." "Then I must learn something about bread," Harry said lightly, pleased to have somewhere to place his charm that would not make him feel like a boy. "Perhaps you will teach me, my lady." "When there is time," Sansa answered. She had learned to say it with the exact accent that said, "We will make a place for you if you make a place we can respect." At the feast, Harry proved precisely what he should have been. Merry when the wine warmed him, too quick to grow insulted when Lynn Corbray made a jest about him mistaking an old mistress for a new. Perfectly graceful on the dais when Robin spoke, which made Sansa like him more than she had expected. He did not sneer at the boy's tremor or the way the cup rattled against the plate. He passed his own to Coleman with deft nothing to see this ease, and later, after the bread course, leaned down and told Robin softly that he had never kept a hawk steady on his fist the first time either, and he would teach him a way to plant his feet that would help. For that, Sansa wanted Peter's plan to succeed. For that, she let her face soften for a breath, and Harry saw it, and he thought he had caused it. "If my lady smiles at bread," he told her later while music made good manners easier, "I can. Oti wait to see how she smiles at justice." "That depends on whether justice is appetizing," Sansa said. "You grow bold in your metaphors," Peter murmured as he passed behind her with a plate of spiced nuts that he pretended to serve with his Lord Protector's hands. Careful. She kept careful. She danced once with Lynn Corbray, who had pretty hands and a mouth that liked the taste of salt. He was dangerous, and he wanted to appear more dangerous than he actually was, which was always useful. "I could be your enemy?" Lynn murmured, as their steps traced circles in the open space. "Everyone could," Sansa said. "Little stone," he said, amused. "He's taught you to rasp." "He's taught me what I would have learned even if he had died at my feet." She met Lynn's eye and let him see something he might not have expected, which was that the girl he twirled had been taught by traitors and kings and deaths. He shivered visibly for the pleasure of it and then bowed so deeply his hair brushed the rushes. And so the Vale had its winter court and its little politics, and the mountain clans had less bread and more arrows in their legs. And Harry flirted when the Lord Protector's daughter entered a room and Lady Waynwood measured every joke twice and cut once. Sansa slept less. She felt the mesh tighten, and once in a while she pressed her fingers along it and wondered where it would break, because everything broke somewhere. It broke where she expected it to and not at all where she expected it. Peter came to her chamber late, when the fire had burned down to coals and the wind was telling one of its many stories at the windows. He did not knock, and she trained herself not to jump when the latch lifted. He came to the fire and stood with his hands behind his back like a man about to solicit a kindness from someone he would later own. "You have made yourself necessary," he told her. "It is a talent you learned quicker than I learned to count coin." "Not quicker," she said. He smiled. "No, but you began later. You have a good head for weights. The lords are weighing you, and their scales say what we want them to say. We should use this moment while it is fresh." "How?" "By showing them where their enemies sit." "In the mountains?" she asked, but she knew he meant elsewhere. "In their halls," he said. "They will not see them. I shall show them. Lin is in our hand. I shall use him to suggest that I am in theirs. That will make them feel magnanimous when they are only being managed. On the 3rd day of midwinter, Jon Royce will call for my head. He thinks he has 7 men ready to say yes. He will have 5. It will be just the right amount of defeat to make him hold his tongue for a season." She turned and looked at him in the way she had learned to look at him when he needed her admiration more than he needed her mind. It was a currency like any other. "You are tireless." "I am hungry," he said. "Hunger does not tire." She nodded. He looked into the coals and then reached and took her hand, and that was the moment. She let him. His fingers were cool, dry, clever. They had set so many coins spinning. "I have not often met a mind that fits my own," he said. "You taught it to." "No," he said, and there was something like truth in his voice that made her toe curl against the rug. "I peeled some of the skin away from it, and it came out very sharp and a little bloody. The world did most of the teaching." He lifted her hand, bowed over it. His mouth did not touch, and she was grateful for the restraint. He stood very near, and the air felt thinner. "Choose me, Sansa," he said, quiet as an oath. He did not say Elaine. He said the name that lived hidden between her ribs, changed the shape of the room. She heard her own breath, and it sounded like a girl's and not a lady's. He was so near she could see how perfectly his beard had been trimmed. She thought of Lisa's hands clinging to him, white-knuckled with a greed that had not looked like love. She thought of the way he had watched the moon door open. She thought of Robin sleeping in his child's bed, twitching. "Choose me," it meant. Choose this way of moving through the world, where knives are prayer and kindness is weight and truth is a spice you can pinch or shovel. It meant, do not let your pity be your collar. It meant, stop telling the story where the pretty girl is saved and recognize you are only saved if you behave as if saving is a craft you can learn. Sansa did not move. "I already have," she said, and in the same breath, "on my terms. My terms will always be near yours," he promised. She drew her hand gently back. "Not always, but near enough for us both to live through winter." He looked at her as if she had told him of a rare wine he could not yet afford. He had wanted her to be a mirror. She had become a window. He did not know yet what he could see through it. "Very well," he said. "We proceed as planned." They did. 3rd day of midwinter came with a sullen sky that spit snow like a joke. The hall filled with meat smoke and families in fur. The Lords Declarant gathered in their corner of the room the way wolves will collect at the edge of a clearing because they understand the clearing belongs to someone. Jon Royce had chosen his words in the night and polished them on his tongue until their edges shone. He stood when the platters had gone but the cakes not yet arrived, and the hush went through the hall like a hand through wheat. "My lord," he said to Robin, and Robin's hand found Sansa's under the table and clamped on. "My lord, the Vale is old and proud, and we have appointed protectors in our need when children have inherited and needed care. Lord Peter Baelish has served us in a time of confusion and sorrow. We are grateful." Sansa had expected it to sound like praise until it wasn't. The words made of themselves a scaffold. "Yet the Vale is slow to forget," Royce went on. "We remember our Lady Lisa. We remember her end. We have heard too many stories that do not fit easily beside each other. We would put them in their correct places, my lord, for your sake and for the sake of the Vale. We ask that Lord Peter step back from the burden he carries, which must weigh heavy on his shoulders, and release it to the hands of men born to it and known to us. There. That was clean and in front of everyone and said in such a way any man could agree without losing face. He had not said murderer. He had not said snake. He had said weary. Weary was safe. Peter let his expression soften with modesty. He rose, bowed. His humility was the most expensive thing he had ever bought. Bronze Yon speaks for the honor of the Vale, he said, his voice low. He speaks for our boy lord. He speaks for past and future. I am only a man who has tried to do right with the small time that was given him. If there are those who would take the weight from my shoulders now that the road is smoother, I would be glad to let them. He paused long enough for an old man to hand his wife a cloth for her nose. And yet I am bound by oath to Lord Robert for this winter at least, and oaths are winter's lodestone. He had the hall then, as much as anyone ever had a hall with 10 different lords each thinking his thought about what those words meant. Sansa felt Robin's fingers trembling and squeezed back. Slow. Lynn Corbray shifted, then rose from where he had slouched like sin in a tapestry's shadow. Oaths, he drawled. Lord Peter is admirably fond of them. He made one to me in confidence, and I am a poor man at keeping secrets when there is a more interesting option. Sansa could have loved him in that moment if it would have done any good. He leaned on the back of his chair with the careless grace of an expensive dagger. He promised me satisfaction for certain debts, Lynn said, letting the word debt drop into the air with its many meanings. He promised me a chance to right a wrong done me by a man who thinks he can strut in my colors and my name. He glanced sidelong at Harry, and Harry's face made a shape he would regret later. He promised me, in short, glory. He is very good at promising. It is a shame we cannot feast on them. But perhaps some of us have eaten well enough already. It worked. They had planned it together in whispers in corners, Lynn's insolence and Peter's humility. The hall moved like a field of barley under a sudden gust. Some laughed in the wrong places. Royce's eyes went flat iron. Lady Anya looked angry for the first time in a decade. Sansa saw how beautifully Peter had salted this feast. Men were haughty here and flattering there and suspicious in the third place, and the admixture would make them all believe what he needed. It would have if Sansa had been someone else. If Sansa had been the girl he thought he had made when he peeled her. But she had watched the drawer where he kept Yon Royce's name, and she had looked into it. She had found what Peter had stored there. An old letter from Lisa, a threadbare suspicion that Bronze Yon had cherished about the way Peter had risen too fast and too handsomely. Petty detail about Royce's younger son's debts, about a bastard boy in a far steading who might or might not be his. A petty indignity performed upon a cousin's bride years ago by a squire wearing Royce colors. Peter meant to use the letter and to shovel a little that pettiness into the stew as if it were a good spice. It would not work. Men like Royce were not built on petty indignities. They were built on iron. To sway them, you must tell them something that would rust that iron. When Lynn had moved and the laughter moved and she felt Peter's look flick to her and away, Sansa rose in the space between breaths and let her voice carry. "My lords," she said. She did not look at Peter. She looked at the boy. Lord Robert is willing to be served and to be educated. He will be both. No man will be permitted to profit by it to the injury of the Vale. Silence made its wide white path. Lynn slowly sat. Peter's mouth tightened, then eased. Yon Royce's head lifted, as if a tone had sounded that he had been waiting for. "I have heard many stories," Sansa went on, "about the night our Lady Lisa died. I was in the castle then. I was helping our lord sleep. I will tell you what I know, because it is winter and truth keeps better in the cold." She told them, careful as skinning a fish. She said nothing she could not defend if a man thrust a knife at her with a word on its edge. She said that her lady aunt had been much distressed by grief and potions. She said there had been a singer who had pleased her lady aunt too much and not enough. She said that the moon door had opened and the sky had taken Lisa Arryn. She did not say how. She did not say who had stood near. She did not say that Peter had held her on the precipice with fingers that had felt like mercy. She said, "I was there." And she said, "The boy lord needs you." She said it with her eyes. She said it with the way she breathed. Jon Royce listened with his hands fisted on the table. He was an old man who had seen a kite ride a thermal. He knew what it was to watch something climb because the air was willing to carry it. He knew it was not always the kite's talent that kept it up. "We are not bookkeepers," he said at last. "We are not singers. We are not poisoners. We are men who stand on a line and do not move when the snow tries its tricks. The Vale has had men who did less. We have had men who did worse. We can survive either. I ask again. Will you lay down the weight, Lord Peter, and let a house old enough to remember being rocks remember how to protect a boy?" "No," Peter said. It was a surprise. Sansa had expected him to bow again and spin out more of his thread. He said one word, and everything changed. "No," he repeated very gently. "I made a promise to a dying woman." A murmur ran through them. He wrote it like a man standing on a rolling deck. "She was mad when she died, yes. But she was lucid when she begged me to keep her boy from men who would use him as a flag or a sword. I am not a man to set down a promise because winter makes my hands ache. When my hands ache, I wrap them in cloth and tighten my grip." He lifted his cup to the boy and drank. He had named the dying woman without naming, and the room tipped toward him, and Sansa saw the edge of it, saw that the Vale would once again be coaxed into letting itself be managed while it told itself that it had made a brave choice about loyalty. It would leave Peter where he wished to be, and perhaps that would be wise for a little while. It would be deadly later. It would leave him with his hands on every purse and every throat. She had chosen him, she had told him as much on her terms. This thing now would set his terms upon the Vale like iron. She would not live with that iron. Not when she had spent such care to temper her own. She stood straighter. The hall waited for someone to speak and did not know it waited. "Lord Royce," she said, and felt something fall from her shoulders that she had not known she wore. "I am Sansa Stark of Winterfell." The room drew breath as one creature. It stretched and tore. The sound was a kind of tearing. It was a kind of beginning. "You are not," Peter said softly. His face did not change, but his eyes did. Sansa did not look at him. She looked at Bronze Jon, who had gone very still. "I am," she said, "and I am the niece of the woman Lisa Arryn was before grief hollowed her. I am the daughter of Eddard Stark, who sat the King's Council and sat Winter as if it had a seat made for him. I am no one's natural daughter. I am a daughter of the North, and I am the closest kin to your boy lord who is not a child." She said it and grew taller with each word. She felt the people with her feet. She felt the small folk and the minor lords and the soldiers whose belts needed tightening. She felt the women who kept fires. She heard them, for she had listened well. Jon Royce made his choice in that place where winter lives in men. He came around his table and went to his knee. He did not lower his head. He did not make a show of it. He simply put his knee to the stone and said, "Lady Sansa." And it was like a door opening and a cold, good wind rushing through. Lady Anya's eyes shone with something she did not let fall. "If I had not known your mother, I might not believe you," she said. "But I did know her, and I always regretted that the Vale had lost a woman like her to the north. Perhaps we have not lost you." Peter stood without moving. The hall did its choosing. Men rose and sank like ships in a gale. Belmore looked like a man who had planned to eat one thing and been served another. Templeton stared as if she had changed into a hawk before him. Miranda's hands were pressed to her mouth, and her eyes were laughing and wet. Harry had gone the color of bone. "But you are married," he blurted. Too young to know how to swallow a thing that would be a problem later. Sansa met his gaze. "I was sold," she said, "and I did not buy. The faith can tell the difference. They would not solve that knot tonight, but it would not be the knot to strangle her." Peter found his voice then. He did not raise it. He did not need. "My lords," he said, "I will go where the Vale bids me, but do not be fools." He let that word sit, warming itself by the fire. "She wears Stark as a cloak, and it is a fine cloak. The north is far. The north is broken with wolves fighting over bone. Do you want them to scent you? Do you want them to turn their yellow eyes to your valley? where the snow is clean and the granaries full? Will you set a girl with winter in her hair to rule a place where the passes are narrow and the roads are treacherous? Will you trust your trade to a child's hand?" He said girl and child with such artistry the words almost seemed truth. Sansa knew better than anyone what those words wanted to do. Shrink her. She felt the heat in her chest and thought of her father, of her mother, of the weirwood's face. She was no tree, but she could be rooted if she wished. She wished it now. "I will not rule as a Stark," she said, and the shock of that fell with the other shocks and made the floor hold. "I will rule as the Vale needs ruling. The Arryns are my kin, and I know the cost of trusting the wrong hand." She did not look at Peter when she said it. She looked at the boy, and Robin lifted his chin and said in a voice that did not tremble much at all, "Al, Sansa keeps the cold from my feet. I want her to stay." That ended it for the moment. Lords are brave until a child asks a thing with his eyes, and then they become men again who remember the sons they buried. They set down their swords for an hour. They deferred the great quarrel and made for themselves a lesser one. They argued into the afternoon and did not see that the shape of things had already altered while they were warming themselves with their words. They did not send Peter out of the Vale that day. Sansa was not foolish. Power melts if you hold it but do not have a vessel. She had only just cracked the ice over the well. You must build a bucket and a rope before you can draw water. They formed a council. It was called Temporary. It was named for winter. Peter remained Lord Protector because that was a thing made in ink, and ink is stubborn. But Sansa Stark, she made the name sit comfortably in her mouth now that she had given it air, stood as regent in fact under a prettier phrase that meant nothing and everything, and all matters pertaining to the boy lord's person and education and the governance of his household and the distribution of winter stores and the safety of the mountain passes were placed under her hand because hands were what she had proven she possessed. Bronze Yone accepted. Lady Anya nodded. Templeton and Redfort looked uneasy and yielded with good grace and better memory. B. Elmore scowled and smiled in the same breath and said he loved change as much as any man, which meant that he did not and would find a way to profit by it. Harry bowed, his face carefully composed. Peter stood, smooth and untroubled, and smiled with the eyes of a man who had found the hole in a bright garment and resolved to widen it later. Later came. Power is a series of rooms. One door opens, and beyond it there is a corridor with a table where fruit sits in a bowl. You may pause and eat the fruit, and when you are finished you will find 5 more doors, and behind each is another corridor and another table. At first this is fine. You were hungry. After a time, even fruit is a chore. Sansa lived that corridor. She learned more quickly than Peter had expected that the work did not require the cleverness that dazzled, but the patience that made good men dull and patient. The boy's cough, the tax on salt, the way snow dampened the fuses in the miners' lanterns, the complaints of men whose wives had been brought to the castle for protection from their fists and who wanted their property returned. The question of whether the Seven would look kindly on a woman ruling a place that called itself traditional when it wanted to be smaller than it could be. The 7,000 little teeth of ruling, all of them sharp. She did not tell herself stories about kindness. She practiced it. She sent bread to a village where the pines had been stripped for heat and the children's eyes had gone wide with the shadows behind hunger. She had the road from Gulltown to the gates patrolled twice as often, and the men paid at once in coin and not in promises, and thus she purchased loyalty at its cheapest and best form. She called on Lady Anya Waynwood for advice and praised her out loud before the hall. So Lady Anya took her advice and polished it and gave it back as if it had been Sansa's all along. She asked Yon Royce to train a corps of boys for service in the household guard, and filled it with second sons and bastards and the grandsons of the miners whose lanterns had drowned. She took in a pair of mountain girls whose hands were good with knives and made them her cupbearers. She found that when they held the knives for her they cut only the bread. She did all this and smiled and did not show her tiredness, because tired women are called shrews and tired men are called commanders. She learned to enjoy the quiet victory of a ledger balanced so precisely it would sing if you turned it the right way. She learned the curve of an honest man's mouth when you returned him his pride without making him pay for it. She learned the way good roads could be built with the stones of small grudges. Peter did not slow his learnings either. He read her with new eyes and kept his hands close to his chest. He became courteous to her in the way a cat is courteous to a bird that it decides not to eat in a given moment because the sun is warm and so is the windowsill. He came and went from Gulltown, where he courted merchants as ardently as he had ever courted a woman. He wrote letters in 3 different ciphers and dictated a 4th to a boy who did not know he was dictating at all. He held Lynn Corbray's leash and let the man tug it. He held Harry's line tight and loose in alternating measure, keeping the boy in just the right degree of discontent to be tractable. He had fingers in every pie in the valley and at least 2 in each pie in the Riverlands. Sansa let him. She let him because she could see farther now than he could in at least one direction. The north. News drifted down the mountain like smoke blown on a wind that did not know from which quarter it blew. The Bolton's banners had been seen at Winterfell. The flayed men set in iron at the gates were said to be Freys or Loyalists or nobodies no one dared to mourn. Stannis had marched and vanished in white. The Night's Watch. She could not think that phrase without swallowing. Had a new Lord Commander who was said to be a bastard with wolf's blood who had sat a chair he was not made to sit upon. She did not know which of these were true. She did not yet have eyes far enough north. She meant to grow them. To do that, she needed coin and ships. To get coin and ships, she needed Gulltown. To get Gulltown, she needed the Graftons, and Peter held the Graftons like a string of pearls he enjoyed running through his fingers. She went to Gulltown with him in a thaw when the roads were mess and the boots got the muck up to the knee, and she found that sea salt exists in the air of that place the way dragon talk exists in old tales. The harbor looked like a mouth with too many teeth. Peter walked there as if he owned the tide. Sansa walked there as if she had learned to count the gulls and then bill them for the fish they stole. Lord Grafton was not yet old enough to be as stubborn as Bronze Yohn. He liked girls and swagger and the way Peter spoke to him, as if both men had a joke together that no one else in the room had the wit to get. Sansa left them the joke and took a walk along the wharves where the sisters' boats bobbed like men's heads in the chop. The sisters had their own way of looking at the world. Eyes narrowed from looking into wind. Men who did not turn their necks when they heard a step coming. She spoke to the Sunderland's factor in a little curtained alcove that smelled of brine and sweetened oil and got him to admit, without admitting, that the sisters wished less to be left to their own devices than to be paid respect. Respect could be purchased with fair weighing and a certain number of fees not charged. She returned to Lord Grafton's table with salt stiff in her hair and a promise tucked inside her sleeves. "Why do you want ships?" Peter asked later, not as if he were surprised, but as if he wished to hear how she would answer. "Because the mountains are high," she said. "The sea is wide. The world is made merely of ways to move across both." "The world is made of ledgers," he said. "And those too," she conceded. He watched her in that cat's own way. "You will have 3 cogs, sister-built, fast and stubborn. One will be yours to name." She named it the Winter Rose and saw something flicker across his face that might have been pity or scorn or the ghost of a story he had once told himself and did not tell anymore. She took the Winter Rose into the mouth of the Green Fork in the first spring, which was no spring at all but a temporary kindness winter had decided to lay upon men to let them live long enough to fear it again. The Riverlands were soggy as bread left too long in the stew. Men's banners looked like laundry left in rain. Sansa went ashore in a little boat with 4 guards in plain cloaks and Miranda at her shoulder because Miranda believed adventure was a jar that needed regular shaking lest the cream turn. They went to Seaguard and ate a fish that tasted like salt and sweet smoke, and she spoke to Lord Mallister with her careful truths. He had kind eyes and too few men and an old sadness about the mouth because he had outlived most of the boys he had squired and many of the men he had sent to war. He listened when she said the Vale had wheat and iron and ships and a lord who meant to steer the realm. He listened better when she said the Vale had her. "Men will say you are Peter's girl," he said bluntly. "Men say many things when they are cold and tired of war," she answered. "They eat when I send bread. They believe when I come again." He did not bend then, but his reeve met her at dusk and asked idle questions about the price of salt cod in Gulltown, and she answered with numbers that were clean and convincing. She understood that men love to add sums as much as they love to be stirred by songs. She found out in Seaguard what Peter had known and tucked away into his little drawers. There were lords in the Riverlands who longed to bite a fry, and there were lords who had made friends with necessity and sucked the marrow out of it. There were Blackwoods holding fast under their ravens, and there were Darries who had been broken and reassembled in the wrong order. There were Manderleys doing a slow, careful dance in White Harbor that looked like foolishness to men who had never set a table with a knife hidden under it. There were Karstarks who might not be wolves anymore. There was Winter's long, pale hand, moving from the wall down across maps like a scratch your mind wanted to rub away and could not. She returned to the Vale with ledgers and letters and promises that were not yet promises, and Jon Royce and Lady Anya read them with their mouths tight and their eyes bright, and Peter read them with his mouth pleased and his eyes shuttered. "We could make a Warden of the East," he said, weighing the words in his palm like a coin. "It is an old honor and a new leash." "On whom?" Sansa asked. He smiled at her. "On the one who can take it." The word came from King's Landing with the smell of tallow candles and dust on old velvet and the sharp sweet of crushed rose petals. Tommen was king, Cersei was in the sept or in jail or in rumor depending on which hand delivered the word. The Tyrells were a garden dug up in great clods, and the small council had grown smaller. The falcon should be named Warden, the letter from the hand said. The Vale should hold the East for the boy king. It was written with a sure hand and sealed with weight. The wax cooled hard, and the letter took on the kind of truth that comes with reaching the right desk at the right time. Peter held it up, and the light went through it and made him look younger. Sansa took it and then put it down and folded her hands. "We will accept," she said, "on the condition that the Warden be a council, not a man." "Councils are messy," Peter said. "So is winter," she answered. "But men live through it if they hold to each other." He watched her and nodded. In this, as in much else, he set his cleverness on the shelf and borrowed hers, because he could taste what it would buy him. A council was a cage you could climb if you knew the bars. They made the council. It had 7 chairs, for piety and because the number sat pleasingly. It had Jon Royce and Lady Anya and Nestor Royce and Simon Templeton and a Redfort and Sansa and, because he could not be kept out, Peter. Harry was invited when they wished to season their stew with youthful salt. Robin attended when it would not make him ill to do so. They called it the Falcon Council at Sansa's suggestion, and someone had brooches made in the shape of a bird in flight with a pin that did not catch on wool. It seemed silly to some and pleased many more. Symbols were bred too, and she set them out with butter. The council governed. The council sent letters and men with cloaks and men with coins. It set the price of remembrance for the families who brought sons to different graves. Half the tax on their harvest forgiven for 3 years if the dead boy had died in the Vale service and not at a phrase jest. It ordered the roads kept by lanterns for the length of one man's march and then the length of another's, so travelers would never spend more than 2 hours in the dark between lights. It declared that the sisters' boats were to be considered under the Vale's protection and not piracy until such time as they had proven themselves piracy, and thus confounded 3 Grafton rivals who had hoped to profit by impounding boats owned by the Sunderland's enemies and friends both. It made small laws that would later look like bones in the body of something large. It made the mountain clans hungrier and therefore angrier, which was a calculation Sansa knew would cost. She paid it in blood that was not her own and made growing peace with the sorrow that followed. And still Peter moved. He smiled at her across the table and handed her the knife when the meat had not been sliced far enough down. He told her jokes about men whose wives had given them daughters and then given them coin. He did not touch her again at night because she had taught him with that small motion that her hand was her hand and would only be lent, not given. He courted Lady Anya with a kind of court that had nothing to do with bed and everything to do with the satisfaction a clever old woman finds in seeing the world recognize at last how clever she has always been. He bullied Graftons with sweets and threats mixed. He wrote letters to men she would have preferred he did not know. He was inevitable as water finding the lowest path in stone. She built with him, around him, past him. She built where his current could be turned into a mill and forced to grind. When he overreached, as all clever men do, she was ready. It was a little thing. It was a very small thing. The very small things are where the large things begin. A boy died. He was the son of a Redfort undercaptain whose men had held a road for 3 days against a winter slide. He died at a table where men had been drinking too long in honor of the road and the snow that had abated. A singer sang a ribald song about a falcon and a mouse and a girl with a smile like a knife. The boy laughed and choked, and his head fell into the trenchers, and when they lifted him his lips were blue. Peter's catspaw in Gulltown had planted a little packet that he had meant to be found by a man with the wrong debts. It was found by a boy with none. Sansa learned of it before Peter did, because grief and story travel quicker than coins when the ground is frozen. She went to the house where the boy had died. She let the mother cry on her cloak and did not mind that the salt stiffened it. She looked at the cup. She looked at the boy's eyes. She asked questions that were only questions and not accusations. She found the packet. After, in the solar, she set it on the table between them. It looked like a scrap of brown paper around something that could have been sugar. Peter did not blink. "That," he said cheerfully, "is not mine." "It is," she said. "Prove it." She stared at him and he stared at her, and between them, in that glance, something that had been a bridge became a knife. "I do not need to prove it," she said. "I am not a court of law. I am the woman who tells the lords of the Vale whether the roads will be clear next month and how much to pay for salted butter, and whether the men they think they have in the passes still have all their toes. I am the woman who decides which girl is sent to which house to pour wine, and whether she will be in danger there, and whether the mountain men will be paid for showing us paths that would swallow our horses. And I am the woman who can say, in the right ear, that the boy didn't need to die." He sat back then, slow. "You are no longer the girl I took from King's Landing," he said, his voice very quiet. "No," she said. "I am the woman you taught to count, Peter. If you wish to be proud of anything in your life, you may be proud of that. Did you not want me to choose you? I did. I chose your usefulness. I did not choose your habits." He stared at the packet. He stared at her. He looked, for a heartbeat, tired. Then the smile opened like a knife in silk. "Then let us tell the right ear," he said. Together. They went together. They went to Yon Royce and to Lady Anya and to Nestor and to Redfort and to Templeton and to Lynn Corbray, because Lynn had spent a lifetime pretending he did not care who died. And sometimes men like that are the best at bearing witness to the things they pretend not to see. They spoke with care. They hung no man on the hook. They drew the shape of the thing and let the lords fill the shape with the color they wished to see. In this way, they preserved their arrangement a little longer. In this way, Peter learned where the line was. He pushed it. He always would. But he had seen it, and it had cut him when he tried to cross. That winter broke at last, not with a warm day but with a wet one. The snow began to rot at its edges. The mountains showed bone. The falcons' banners hung limp and damp, and the smell of men who had not taken off their boots for days lifted out of the halls with the steam. They had made it through. Men wanted to call it a miracle. Sansa let them. She sent men with brooms to sweep the halls before they called it a miracle, because the first lesson of miracles is that they are easier to believe in rooms that do not stink. They held a spring court, which is to say a winter court without the certainty that tomorrow would be colder and therefore easier. Men had plans. The road to Hart's home was passable. The gulls were already making nests. The sisters were sly. The Riverlands were sicker than a boy too long in a hot room. Sansa stood beneath the banners and listened to the sounds of puddles and hope. Harry came to her with his pride dressed like courtesy. "Lady Sansa," he said. He had practiced the title, and it looked well on him. "Lord Harding," she returned. "We are well matched," he said. "You for the boy lord, I for the Vale. You were almost elegant," she said. And he laughed because he knew she saw through him, and he liked that the seeing did not disgust her. "Come," she said. "Walk with me." They walked along the eastern wall, where the stone was cold but the wind had stopped biting. "I will not be your toy," she told him. "If you wish me at your side, you will mend your leash. Peter holds it. Cut it." He stiffened. "He protected me when my father's debts made men bold. He owns you because of that. Own yourself. Lady Anya loves you and knows you. Step into what she knows about you and make it true. If you do not, you will look like a boy forever." "And if I do," he said, "what then?" "Then perhaps," Sansa said, "we will knit a house between us that will hold a valley and a winter." He swallowed. "You are married," he said again. But this time he said it without fear. "I am bound," she said. "The faith will unwind it when it is the faith's time to prefer me unwound. That time will come, and Peter will help you see to it. He thinks he can notch you to his bow and shoot you where he wants. Take the bow. Fire the arrow yourself." His eyes lit at that. He saw it. He liked seeing it. He would fail at it sometimes. He would succeed sometimes. He would not be a fool forever. She could work with that. By summer, such as it was, the Vale had ships. More than 3. And men trained to keep order on the roads, and women who carried knives in their sleeves and showed them when it was the right time to show them. The falcons held the east. The king in King's Landing sent letters in a new hand that spoke with a care that had not been there before. White Harbor sent fish and news of snows almost as deep as men, and a story about a Lord Commander who had been stabbed and did not die, or did and would return, or had gone to walk with ghosts. The story had more versions than there were oars on one of Sansa's cogs. The Riverlands were too tired to rise yet, but they had risen in their hearts, which is the first place. Men started to say her name in the wrong rooms. This is how you know when a thing is beginning to be true. Peter came to her once more, late, when the fire had almost died and the night smelled like water. "We have built a country," he said, and for the first time she saw awe in him that did not revolve around himself. "We have built our part," she said. "The North will notice. They will." "Stannis did not die," Peter said, mouth twisting. "Or he did. Word is a goat that climbs wherever it pleases." "I do not plan from ghosts," Sansa said. "When a man comes to my gate, I will count his men and his bread and decide whether to let him in by more than his name. Names are wind. Winter taught me that. You will be a terror to them," he said, half pleased, half afraid. "I will be a woman with a fire to keep." He stepped close then, and, for the first time since he had said, "Choose me," he looked as if he stood at an edge he did not know. "And me?" he said. "What will you be to me?" "A partner," she said. "A threat. Pupil who has turned out too well. A mirror that shows you old and small. A knife. A hand. Choose your metaphor." He closed his eyes, laughed once without humor, and bowed. "My lady, my lord," she said. That autumn, a skiff overturned in Gulltown Harbor. It was one of a dozen small boats that had borne men across the slick water to a larger tub that had come in late from the sisters and wished not to be observed doing so. The skiff turned with a sudden gust. Men cried out. By the time the harbor hands threw lines, the little boat had spun and then slipped down like a coin in a fountain. They pulled 3 men out with pale faces and bloated bellies. One body did not rise with the others. It was found 2 days later near the old pilings, lodged in such a way a man would have had to climb out and tug it to get it free. Peter Baelish had a scar above his left knee shaped like a crescent moon where a woman had stabbed him once in bed. The harbor hands saw the scar and named him. Gulltown muttered for a week, and then the gulls went back to their eating. In the Vale, Sansa sat with the letter the harbor master wrote with his clumsy hand and listened to the sound of wind. Felt absurdly like relief. It felt like walking into a room where the mirror had been taken down and the wall was blank stone. It felt like a freedom she had not known she would want. She let herself grieve him. She grieved the teacher and the knife, the man who had taught her to see the world's levers and had meant to lever her until she broke. The man who had said Sansa and meant possession and had met a woman who wore the name like a crown. She cried for all of it, and then she went to the council. "We will mourn Lord Peter," she said. "He lifted us from a tangle at a bad time and set us in the right road. He lied, he cheated, he made himself necessary. He did some good. We do not spend much time remembering why a knife is sharp. We use it. Now we set it aside." They looked at her and they did not know how to decide whether to praise or fear. She told them how to behave because she did not have time to wait for them to come to it on their own. "Gulltown will be ours," she said. "The Graftons will keep it and pay for the honor. The Sunderlands will be given dignity where dignity does not threaten coin. The mountain passes will continue to be efforts rather than triumphs. The boy lord will learn to hold his stomach in when he speaks so he does not sound like a bellows with a hole. The roads will be lit. The sisters will send us salt fish, and we will pretend we love it. The Riverlands will be ready soon, and we will be ready for them. I will send bread. We will send steel. We will not send songs." After, she went alone to the Eyrie. The high passes had frozen again with early frost, and only the most certain feet dared the ropes. She went with 2 guards and left them at the second tower and went on alone. The air was a blade that cut at the inside of your nose. The sky was too near and vast, both. The castle was a skeleton of blue stone and white breath. It had forgotten the noise and heat of men. She stood where her aunt had stood before she had fallen into the sky. She stood where she had stood when Peter had taken her hand and turned her and saved her and made it into the shape of a story. He told himself about himself. The wind said nothing to her. The sky stayed where sky stays. The stone under her boots was very real. She did not have to forgive the dead. She only had to decide how to live with them. "I will keep the fire," she said to the empty air. "I will hold the passes. I will take bread north when the road is open. I will not let songs tell lies about us. I am Sansa Stark, and I rule the Vale." In spring, when the river ice ran like veins through the valley and the meadows mad, either green, wet and new, a rider came up from the fingers with a cloak in a shape she knew before she saw the sigil. It was not a wolf. It was a flayed man. He rode as far as the first gate and then was not permitted to climb farther because the guards did not like his smell or his story. He handed up a sheaf of parchment with its ugly pink wax. Sansa took it in her gloves and read it in the yard with mud on her boots. It said, "The North welcomed the Vale's Lady Regent to present herself to the new Lord of Winterfell, who had a nice taste for wives that matched his taste for pastry. Said, we will make a place for you. Said, come walk into a trap with your eyes prettily open." Sansa walked into the great hall and burned the letters one by one on a little iron plate. The smell was faintly sweet. "Lords," she said, when she had drawn them to her with a bell and a clear gaze. "The North writes. We will write back. Tell them we have winter to hold. Tell them we had to count the men who keep our children from starving. Tell them we had to salt fish. Tell them nothing else." "You mean to rule the North too?" Lyn Corbray said afterwards, grinning. "Tell me when I should ride to be a hero in a song." Sansa looked at him and remembered King's Landing and the way songs felt in the mouth when she was a girl. "We are making different songs," she told him. "The kind without lies." He laughed, delighted. "Those are the dullest songs, my lady. They are the ones that last." She rode the Winter Rose north when the roads would allow it. Not to Winterfell because that would be foolish, but to White Harbor where the Manderleys made stratagems out of butter. She took bread and news and asked for both. She spoke to the old fat man who liked to eat and liked to watch men look at him and think him soft. She watched him eat and let him watch her look at him and think him sharp. She asked him for ships quietly. He promised her stories loudly. She learned the names of carpenters who could lay a hull's bones straight and the names of widows who had lost 3 sons and would take coin to watch a warehouse in return for grain. She learned to talk to maids whose eyes had seen men dead in alleys she had not walked since she came south. She learned to exchange a little truth for a great one. "My brother lives. My brother does not. The wall holds. The wall does not." On the return trip, she stood at the prow and felt the spray salt her face and did not taste tears in it. The world was large and small. The sky was the same at sea and at the Eyrie. The knife she had sharpened in the Vale would cut in the north. She would not let it cut her. When she returned, Robin had grown taller. His mouth had grown more stubborn. He laughed when Harry said something truly funny and not only when the room required it. He took bread from the platter with a hand that did not tremble much. He falconed with a bird that was old and patient and generous with a boy she liked. He had learned to say no with a voice that sounded like yes and then made men obey anyway. He would live if the world would let him. She meant to make the world let him. She meant to make the Vale a place that held, and then to carry that holding north on ships with names like Winter Rose and Hope and Cunning. The Lords Declarant grew old one by one. They were not carved in ice. They were men. Jon Royce had grandsons who sat at his feet and listened to his lies and truths about bronze and girded themselves in it. Too narrow-chested now and sure to fill. Lady Anya asked Sansa to sit when her knees hurt and called her dear in a way that meant more than affection. Lyn Corbray did what Lyn would always do, which was to dance along a cliff and choose, every time, not to fall because he liked the feeling of air on his face better than he liked the idea of dying. Harry learned to hold his liquor and his tongue and sometimes the line in his hand without yanking it. Nestor Royce died quietly in a chair with his accounts neat. Miranda married a man whose lands smelled like iron and came to court twice a year with stories and coins and laughter that sounded like bells. Sansa watched them. She kept them. She let go what could not be kept. When winter came back harder than before, as she had always known it would, the Vale was ready in the ways a place can be ready for such things. There were candles stored and hiding places tallied and men who had walked their roads without stopping to argue about who owned them. There were barrels of salted fish hidden in places men might not look for fish in. There were women who knew how to sew wool into the edges of men's gloves so their fingers would not go dead. There was a boy lord who could be coaxed to bed without a fight. There was a woman who ruled with hands and did not care who wrote down what she had done. When the raven came black and quick with a scrap tied to its leg, she was in the kitchens, teaching a girl to test the heat of a griddle with a drop of water. The scrap said, Winterfell, said battle, said wolves, said white, said come if you can. It had been written by a hand she did not know, and that made it braver and more dangerous, both. She went to the council. We send bread, she said, and we send men south to Horus to guard the passes to the riverlands. We keep enough to hold our mountains. We will not be heroes. We will be necessary. Men like heroes, Harry said. He was older now, and she knew when he spoke folly on purpose to measure another. Then let them make songs, Sansa said. We will give them the bread to sing on. She did not sleep that night. She went to the Eyrie again when the first light began to decide whether to be day. The cold did not bite. It burned. The air felt thin as truth. She watched the sky pretend to crack and then do it. She stood a while. She thought of a girl in King's Landing tasting lemon cakes and thinking she knew the shape of songs. She thought of a boy on a wall of ice. She thought of Peter's hand on hers and of a skiff turning in a harbor. She thought of bronze. She thought of bread. When she came down, the men were ready. The women had laid out the skirts they would use to carry the hard loaves slung like stones. The children had found their sleds. The falcons shrieked from their mews. The bells rang as if someone had dropped them and then decided to let them roll. She lifted her cloak and fastened it. The brooch she wore had become the one she would be buried with. It was not her mother's. It was a falcon with its wings half spread. Its eye gleamed a little. It was no wolf. It had become hers. They went out into winter. The mountains waited, as they always had. The passes narrowed and then opened and then narrowed again. The wind combed the hair from their faces and flattened their breath. They did not bow. They only waited. Sansa rode in the center of the column, and sometimes she went forward to where Yon's grandson held the line and the place where the snow was shallow enough to count as road. Sometimes she fell back where Miranda's voice made the men remember why they had a home they wished to see again. Sometimes she rode beside Harry and let him tell her all the things he would do if the world were kinder. Sometimes she rode alone and counted, in her head, how many loaves would be enough if the weather turned and they could not find the right path between two rocks where wolves had slept. It was not a song. It was not a miracle. It was what ruling looks like when you choose it knowing what it costs. At night, she dreamed of Winterfell again. In the dream, it was no longer silent. There were voices in it whom she did not recognize, and some she did. There were ravens on the battlements, and they did not fly away when she came up to them. They hopped along the stone beside her like companions. One of them had a white feather in its wing. When she woke, the taste in her mouth was not quite salt and not quite iron. She put her feet on the cold floor. She went to the window and looked out at a world she had helped to shape by staying, by choosing, by keeping the fire. Snow fell again. The mountains did not bow. They only waited, and in their waiting there was a kind of reverence, and in that reverence there was a country. She stood a while and whispered her own name, and then she said the name of the place she ruled, and the names braided themselves together and made something that could be held. Then she turned and went to work,